position of the object. If the vehicle was on the foreground, the vehicle you draw on your frame must also be on the foreground. If the vehicle was on the background, the vehicle you draw must also be on the background. If a feature you are drawing was in the middle ground, then what you are drawing must be on the middle ground. In a simple term, I'm saying while you are drawing the various features in your frame, you must ensure that their location are normally placed according to the location that they occupied on the photograph. So that if a feature was on the foreground on the photograph and you draw it on the background in the frame, that feature will be marked wrong, dear girls. I hope tunaelewana. Another important thing, you will be asked, draw and label. In photograph work, even if you draw as a good diagram, I don't know, I can compare to what, and you don't label your diagrams, you will get 0. If the marks were 5 and you draw a good diagram like a good a person who has done arts, fine arts, and you don't label it, you get 0. All diagrams drawn must always be labeled. Remember, I've used the word must. The diagrams that are drawn, girls, must always be labeled. Another problem comes when we come to labeling. When you are labeling, dear girls, labelings must be done within the frame. If this was a person, you must ensure that you write the word person inside the frame. If you bring the word person outside the frame, then what you will have labeled again will not score. What I mean is that in photograph, all labeling must always take place within the frame. Any labeling done outside the frame, dear girls, that one will be considered a wrong labeling and you will be given 0. I hope we are together there. After looking at labeling of various features in the photograph, it is important that I tell you that as you draw frame, you must always ensure that you indicate the measurements of your frame. If the length was 10, you must write 10 centimeters. If the width was 6, you must write along the width 6 centimeters. In as much as they don't score, but you must always ensure that you write them. Girls, in the photograph, the title don't score. It is unlike in paper 1, where we have a cross-section where the title scores, or in paper 2, where in statistical methods, title score. In photograph work, title don't score. So if you will have written the title, the examiners will only write there seen, which means the title that you will have written will have been seen even as much as it is not going to attract any marks. Girls, after looking at the alignment and labeling of the photograph, another important area in photograph work is description of features. The subtopic, description of features in photograph. How do you describe features in photograph work? That was a question that was asked in the year 2008, where there was a topic called pastoralism. And then candidates were asked to describe the features within the photograph. How do you describe features, dear girls? When you are asked to describe features on a photograph, what you need to do, you are required to mention a feature and the position of that feature on the photograph, or mention a feature and where that feature is found on the photograph. For example, you are given a photograph and you are asked to describe the features on the photograph, 5 marks. If there are vegetation, there are grass on the foreground, you will say there are grass in the foreground. If the middle ground is bare, you will say there is a bare ground in the middle ground. If there are some cows grazing in the middle ground, you will say there are cows in the middle ground. If there are scattered trees in the middle ground, you will say there are scattered trees in the middle ground. If there is a hill at the background, you will say there is a hill at the background. If there is a sky at the background, you will say there is a sky at the background. What am I saying in simple terms? You are asked, describe the features of a photograph. What are you supposed to do? Mention a feature and its geographical location on the photograph, then you will have done. After looking at the description of features, dear girls, another important area as far as photograph work is concerned is time of the day when the photograph was taken. This is a question that was asked last in the year 2014. This was a photograph that came with the topic urbanization. If you can have made familiar, check this photograph on urbanization. Candidates were asked to give the time of the day when that photograph was captured. What do you do when you are asked such a question? What do you do? At what time of the day was the photograph captured? Girls, photographs are captured only at 3 different times as far as photograph work is concerned. A photograph can only be captured at 3 different times. Time number 1, a photograph is captured in the morning. You don't say morning. In the morning. You are asked at what time of the day was this photograph captured? Then you say in the morning. A photograph can again be captured in the evening, not evening. Don't say that a photograph was captured evening. It was captured in the evening. The third time when a photograph is captured, and this is the area where candidates make a lot of mistakes, a photograph is captured around noon. Most candidates say that a photograph is captured at noon. No, a photograph is captured around noon. Dear girls, when you are asked the time of the day when a photograph is captured, this is as well as asking you your Form 1 knowledge about the rising and the setting of the sun. The sun rises from which direction? The sun rises from the east and the sun sets to the west. Another important thing is that the shadow of an object will always be in an opposite side with reference to the position of the sun, which means If the sun is to the east, the shadow will take the western direction. If the sun is to the west, the shadow will take the eastern direction. And remember, the sun is to the east only in the morning hours. The sun is to the west only in the evening hours. So in the morning hours, when the sun is to the east rear guards, the shadow will take the western direction. In the evening, when the sun is to the west, then the shadow will take the eastern direction. Remember, in the photograph, the sun will not be drawn. What will be drawn is the shadow. So it's upon you to identify whether the shadow is taking the western direction or the shadow is taking the eastern direction. If the shadow is taking the eastern direction, it therefore means that the sun is to the west, and the sun can only be to the west in the evening, and therefore it means that that photograph was taken in the evening. If the shadow takes the western direction, it means that the sun is to the east, and the sun can only be to the east in the morning, and it therefore means that the photograph was taken in the morning. In a simple term, how do you identify a photograph that was taken in the morning, or a photograph that was taken in the evening, or a photograph that was taken around noon? In the morning, the shadow will always be long, and the shadow will always point. The shadow will always be long, and the shadow will always be long, and the shadow will always point towards the western direction. In the evening, the shadow will always be long, and the shadow will always point towards the eastern direction. Around noon, the shadow will be shorter than the object, and the shadow will be on the either direction. Why either direction? Around noon can be 11:30 or it can be 12:30. So if it's 11:30, the shadow is still to the east. The sun is still to the east. The shadow will be to the west but shorter than the object. If it is 12:30, the sun will be towards the western direction, and therefore the shadow will be to the east but shorter than the object. So a shadow which is shorter than the object and is on the either side of the object indicates that the photograph was taken around noon. I hope we are together, girls, because after this, you are going to ask some questions which I will answer. I've just talked about the time of the day when the photograph can be taken. That is in the morning, in the evening, and around noon. Can we, girls, move ahead and now look at activities taking place in the photograph? Again, this is a challenging area as far as photograph is concerned, because candidates do confuse activities taking place in the photograph with economic activities taking place in the photograph. Activities taking place in the photograph is what you see taking place in that photograph. What you actually see. For example, cows grazing. If you see cows grazing in the photograph, then you are asked activities taking place in the photograph. You say cows grazing. People collecting sugarcane. You talk about a person standing. You talk about people walking, people planting. what you see taking place in the photograph becomes an activity. What about economic activity, dear girls? Economic activity taking place in the photograph is any paper 2 topic. For example, we can have farming, we can have livestock farming, we can have maize farming, we can have forestry, we can have fishing, we can have energy conservation, we can have environmental conservation, we can have trade, we can have transport, we can have communication, we can have industrial development. Any paper 2 topic that is captured on the photograph becomes economic activity, while activity is that which you see on the photograph. After looking at economic activity and activities taking place in the photograph, dear girls, can we move ahead and now look at interpretation of the photograph? Interpretation of the photograph is a topic or subtopic or a question that requires, we call it application question in photograph work, because you will be given a photograph, and from that photograph you will be required to use the theory that Mr. Ouma Otieno has taught you in class to answer the question on the photograph. For example, you can be given a photograph that has green grass, a photograph with dairy animals, a photograph with forest, a photograph with a hill. There is a hill, there is a forest, there is green vegetation, and then there is dairy cattle. And then you are asked, what indicators in the photograph shows that the region where the photograph was taken receives high rainfall? You know, this is a question that requires you to interpret. What is it that you can see on the photograph which indicates that this area receives high rainfall? You will say, I'm seeing dairy animals. Presence of dairy animals, because dairy animals can only be reared in regions with high rainfall. Presence of a forest. Forests are found in areas that receive high rainfall. Presence of a hill. Hills will always lead to the formation of orographic or relief rainfall. Presence of green grass. Green grass will only be there if there is high rainfall. Or you can be given a photograph and then you are asked to interpret why you can think that that photograph was captured when it was very hot. Number one, look at the shadow. If the shadow is short, it means the photograph was taken around noon, and around noon, the sun is normally overhead, and this means that in Kenya, the temperature was very hot. Look at whether the person is carrying an umbrella, the person is putting on a cap, the person is bare-chested. Look at all those. This is an area that requires you to use a theory knowledge to interpret the photograph. Girls, after looking at that, those are the only areas that are normally set in photograph. If you have any question in photograph work, you are going to ask, dear girls, and I will answer. I was told that this lesson is going to take 1 hour. We are exactly 45 minutes, which means we are having 15 minutes, girls, to go. At this particular time, if you can allow me, and with the permission of your teacher of geography, the teacher I respect so much, Mr. Oumutieno. Girls, allow me to take you through a topic known as agriculture. Under this topic called agriculture, actually majority of teachers fear it, and in most cases, this is a topic that is left for candidates to do it alone. If such a topic is left to you to do it alone, then you will have a lot of problems, because there are key areas that we normally look at when we are marking. A good example, before we look at, remember, the first thing that you need to know under agriculture, what is agriculture? That's a question that any of us can answer. That agriculture is the rearing of animals and growing of crops for consumption or for sale in order for you to get profit. It's a question that rarely comes. But girls, when this topic called agriculture is set, a topic or a subtopic that rarely misses, and it's an area where girls and boys don't score in KCSE, is normally physical factors favoring growth of crops. Remember, under agriculture, the crops that we are looking at is number one, sugarcane. We are